Welcome to Stories TH. If you're new to our channel, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss out on more amazing stories. Today, we're diving deep into the life of Chloe Williams, a young woman whose family secrets, personal struggles, and a series of unexpected events lead her on a journey of self-discovery and transformation. Grab a seat, relax, and let this emotional roller coaster take you through Chloe's world. Chloe Williams, a 28-year-old woman living in the heart of New York City, stood at the bustling intersection of 5th Avenue and 59th Street, staring up at the towering skyscrapers that surrounded her. It was hard to believe that only a few years ago, she had lived a completely different life, one filled with luxury, high society parties, and endless opportunities. She had once been the envy of her peers, with a family that seemed untouchable. But now everything had changed. Chloe's story wasn't one of easy success. She was a dreamer, a lover of art, and particularly passionate about fashion. From a young age, she had been captivated by the power of design, the way clothes could transform a person, how they could express emotions and tell stories without a single word being spoken. Growing up in a family of wealth and privilege, Chloe was often surrounded by art and creativity. Her mother, a renowned designer in her own right, often took Chloe to galleries, fashion shows, and exclusive events. Chloe's dream was to one day own her own fashion house, a dream that she nurtured through late-night sketches and hours spent perfecting her designs. However, life wasn't as simple as she had imagined. Behind the glossy facade of luxury, her family had a darker side, one filled with risky investments and financial mismanagement. Her father, a successful real estate developer, had made one too many bets on the wrong projects. The economic downturn hit hard, and with one catastrophic mistake, Chloe's world came crashing down. The mansion they once lived in was sold off, along with the art collections that had taken decades to amass. Their bank accounts drained, leaving Chloe and her family struggling to find footing. Her father, once a proud man who had provided for their every need, was now a shadow of his former self, unable to cope with the financial ruin he had brought upon them. Her mother, always the strong and supportive figure, fell into a depression, which only deepened as her business collapsed. For Chloe, the collapse of her family was more than just a financial disaster, it was a loss of identity. The rich, glamorous life she had known was gone, replaced by an uncertain future. She had no idea how to start over. The dreams she had once held so dearly now felt like distant memories, out of reach in a world that had turned upside down. She felt like a stranger in her own life, surrounded by reminders of the world she had lost. But despite the overwhelming sense of loss, Chloe wasn't one to give up easily. Her passion for fashion and art hadn't died with the collapse of her family's fortune. No, in fact, it had become even more important to her. She refused to let the weight of her family's downfall define her. She knew that she had to rebuild, not just her career, but her sense of self. It wasn't going to be easy, but Chloe was determined to fight. She packed her things and moved out of the family's former mansion and into a modest apartment in Brooklyn, an area that had once seemed far too humble for someone like her. The apartment was small, but it was hers. It was a new start. Chloe used the little money she had left to invest in the tools she needed to start her fashion line. She took up odd jobs, working as a personal shopper, helping friends with styling, and even designing for local boutiques. It was a far cry from the extravagant lifestyle she had once known, but it was honest work. Slowly but surely, Chloe began to make a name for herself. Her designs, though not yet world famous, were gaining attention, especially on social media platforms. She was determined to prove that her talent wasn't tied to the wealth she had lost, but to her passion and creativity. But the road to success was not without its hurdles. Every day felt like a battle against the tide. Chloe had to juggle multiple jobs, sleepless nights, and the overwhelming pressure of surviving in a city that never slowed down. New York, with its shimmering lights and endless opportunities, could also feel cold and unforgiving at times. Chloe often found herself wondering if she was truly cut out for this life, if she was strong enough to keep fighting. One evening, As Chloe sat at her sewing machine in her small apartment, working on a design for a local boutique, a familiar sound broke the silence. It was her phone ringing. She stared at the screen, her heart sinking when she saw the name. Logan Bennett. Logan. The name brought back a rush of memories from her past. He was the son of one of her father's business partners. Their families had been close, so close that Logan and Chloe had spent many afternoons together in their youth, growing up in the same social circles. They had been friends, but there was always something more that Chloe had never fully acknowledged. Logan had always been charming, confident, and ambitious, just like his father. But while he had the world at his feet, Chloe had always felt like an outsider. Their worlds were different. His life was about success, power, and connections, while hers was more about love, passion, and creating. When Chloe picked up the phone, Logan's voice was as smooth and assured as ever. He had heard about her situation, and while he had always been a bit of a distant acquaintance, there was something in his tone that was different this time. He offered her an opportunity that would help Chloe get back on her feet. He told her about a project he was working on, a project that could use her talents. It was the break she had been waiting for, but Chloe hesitated. She had never wanted to lean on Logan for help. She had always prided herself on her independence. But as she sat there in her modest apartment, the phone in her hand, she realized that she didn't have to do it alone. The opportunity was too big to turn down. Chloe had spent the last few years struggling to find herself again, to make her own way without relying on anyone else. But now, she was faced with a choice. Would she continue down this lonely road, fighting her battles in silence? Or would she allow herself to accept the help being offered by someone from her past? Someone who could potentially open doors to the success she had dreamed of. The choice was difficult, but deep down, Chloe knew that she could no longer deny the reality that help, sometimes, was necessary. Logan Bennett, the man who had once been a distant memory, was now offering her a chance to reclaim what she had lost, and maybe even more. And so, with a mix of uncertainty and hope, Chloe Williams decided to take the first step on a journey that would not only transform her career, but also her understanding of herself. A journey that would test her strength, her resilience, and her ability to trust again. As she hung up the phone, Chloe felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The first crisis, family bankruptcy before everything collapsed, Chloe Williams had lived a life many only dream of, a life draped in luxury, opulence, and high expectations. Growing up in the heart of Manhattan, her family was the embodiment of success. Her father, Richard Williams, was a prominent figure in the business world, a respected real estate mogul known for making savvy investments that led to the acquisition of vast properties across the city. Her mother, Eleanor Williams, had cultivated a reputation for elegance and sophistication, hosting exclusive galas and charity events that attracted the city's elite. To Chloe, the world was a playground of privilege, where the brightest future was carved from high ambitions, success, and wealth. Chloe, the only child of Richard and Eleanor, was raised to understand that success was not just an aspiration, but an expectation. Every achievement, every milestone in her life was met with applause, but also pressure. From a young age, her parents had instilled in her the belief that she had to succeed not just for herself, but for the family legacy. "You have to be better than I ever was," her father would often say, pushing her to excel beyond her own dreams, yet always reminding her of the importance of maintaining appearances. Chloe's life had been one of meticulously planned outings, from fashion shows to exclusive dinners, and she had never known a life without the sense of being someone in the public eye. She attended the best private schools, where she was not only expected to excel academically, but also socially, as the Williams name was synonymous with wealth, power, and influence. From an early age, Chloe had learned that her life's purpose was entwined with the success of her family, and she felt an unspoken responsibility to uphold the image of perfection that her parents had meticulously crafted. She often overheard her parents discussing the future of the family, which always revolved around their business empire. She knew her parents' love for her, was conditional rooted in her ability to continue the tradition of success. At the age of 20, Chloe was groomed for greatness, with her future laid out before her. But like many young people, Chloe was also a dreamer. She loved fashion, art, and design passions that didn't exactly align with the corporate world her parents envisioned for her. Still, she pushed those desires aside, choosing to focus on building her own career in the family business, believing that was her path to fulfillment. However, in one moment, everything changed. The very empire that had sustained their family for decades began to crumble beneath the weight of a single poor decision. Chloe's father had always been a risk-taker, someone who believed that bold moves often led to immense rewards. But in the fast-paced world of real estate, even the most experienced investors could make grave miscalculations. Richard Williams, in his pursuit of expanding the family's real estate portfolio, took a monumental risk investing in a high-end development project that was predicted to yield enormous returns. The project, however, was based on inaccurate market predictions and an overestimation of the area's growth potential. For years, Richard had been involved in lucrative deals, and this one seemed like another opportunity to bolster the family's wealth. But in a cruel twist of fate, the development project failed. The luxury apartments sat empty, unsold, and ultimately, the project's value plummeted, sending the entire family's finances into a downward spiral. Richard's prideful refusal to acknowledge the early signs of failure only worsened the situation. The Williams family, once an emblem of wealth, found themselves with mountains of debt and no way to climb out. It wasn't just about money. The Williams family's name had long been associated with success, but now it was intertwined with failure. Chloe's mother, Eleanor, who had prided herself on her impeccable social standing, felt the sting of humiliation as her prestigious circle of friends began to distance themselves from her. Invitations to galas, charity events, and private parties stopped coming, and the reality of their financial situation set in with brutal clarity. The grand estate that had once been the backdrop for Chloe's childhood was sold to cover a fraction of the family's debt, and Chloe was forced to watch her world slip through her fingers like sand. For Chloe, the fallout was devastating. The pressure to maintain the family's image was replaced with a stark, raw truth: her identity had been completely tied to her family's success. As their wealth evaporated, Chloe was left to confront a devastating question. Who was she if she wasn't a Williams? She could no longer rely on the luxury, the status, or the constant stream of opportunities that had once been available to her. She felt as though her worth had been defined solely by her family's legacy, and now that legacy had crumbled into nothingness. Chloe tried to hide her pain, pretending that the loss didn't affect her as much as it did, but the truth was she was suffocating. Her sense of self was entirely linked to the life she had known, and without it, she felt lost. The girl who once stood at the front of every social event, poised and confident, was now unsure of her next steps. It was a humbling, painful transition. Chloe's closest friends, those who had once been her companions in the lap of luxury, began to distance themselves. As their parents' businesses began to recover, they went on with their lives, leaving Chloe to wrestle with the reality that her life would never be the same again. The dream of entering the fashion world, of designing and creating, which she had abandoned for the sake of her family's business, now seemed like a distant fantasy. The dreams Chloe had once cherished became little more than painful reminders of everything she had lost. For months, Chloe was consumed by feelings of anger, betrayal, and sadness. She had never imagined that something so catastrophic could happen to her family. Her father, who had once been her hero, was now a broken man, unable to face the reality of what had happened. Chloe felt a growing resentment toward him, not for the mistakes he made, but for the way he refused to admit them. Meanwhile, her mother's grief became her own, as Eleanor, once a vibrant and strong woman, now existed in the shadow of her former self. She was consumed by the loss of their wealth, struggling to reconcile the woman she once was with the one she had become. Chloe's family's bankruptcy was not just about the loss of wealth, it was about the loss of identity, pride, and connection. Everything they had worked for was gone, and with it, Chloe's sense of belonging. She had to come to terms with the idea that her worth was not tied to her family's name, and that in order to move forward, she would need to let go of the past. It was a painful realization, but it was the first step in her journey toward healing. In the midst of this turmoil, Chloe made a bold decision. She decided to step away from the remnants of her past and find her own path. The streets of New York City, once intimidating and foreign to her, were now a blank canvas, waiting for her to make her mark. It was in the chaos of this new reality that Chloe began to rebuild herself, one step at a time. No longer could she hide behind the facade of wealth and privilege. She was forced to face the world as it was, raw and unfiltered. But it was also in this struggle, this fight for survival, that Chloe began to rediscover her true self, a woman of strength, creativity, and resilience, ready to carve out a future of her own. Chloe's journey was just beginning. The pain of losing everything would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. It was in her struggle that Chloe found her greatest strength, her ability to rise from the ashes, to rebuild, and to dare to dream again. It would take time, but Chloe was determined to reclaim her life. The road ahead would be long, but she had already taken the first step. And for the first time in months, Chloe felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The second crisis, the death of her mother. Chloe Williams had always relied on her mother, Eleanor, for unwavering support throughout her life. From a young age, Chloe's mother had been her anchor in a world that often felt overwhelming and unpredictable. While her father, Richard, had pushed Chloe toward the family business, imposing expectations of success and wealth, Eleanor was the gentle presence that provided Chloe with a sense of comfort and love. She was the one who attended every ballet recital, every art show, and every moment that mattered to Chloe. No matter how much Chloe's world shifted, her mother was always there, steady and true, a constant source of encouragement. When Chloe's world had come crashing down with the bankruptcy of her family, it was her mother who held her hand through the darkest times. Eleanor was the one who told Chloe it was okay to be scared, to feel lost, and most importantly, that she would always be her daughter, regardless of their financial standing. But Chloe's world would again be shattered when, just a few months after the bankruptcy, her mother was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of cancer. The diagnosis came suddenly, as a heavy blow that Chloe hadn't been prepared for. It was late one evening when Eleanor had called Chloe, her voice weak and shaky. "Chloe, darling, I need to tell you something," Eleanor had said, her words trembling with a quiet vulnerability Chloe had never heard from her mother before. "I've been diagnosed with cancer." Chloe's heart had stopped for a moment, the words seeming surreal. Her mother, the woman who had always been strong and graceful, was now facing a fight for her life. The news seemed almost impossible to process. How could someone as vibrant as Eleanor be struck down by something so devastating? And yet, Chloe couldn't deny the gravity of the situation. Her mother, the pillar of her life, was slowly fading before her eyes. Over the course of several months, Chloe watched helplessly as her mother's health deteriorated. The woman who had once been the picture of elegance and poise now became frail, her beauty dulled by the toll of chemotherapy treatments and the disease that ravaged her body. Chloe spent countless hours at her mother's side, comforting her, trying to offer whatever solace she could. Yet, no amount of love could reverse the damage the cancer had already done. Despite the growing sense of helplessness, Chloe tried her best to maintain hope. But with each passing day, her mother's condition worsened. Chloe's father, Richard, although present physically, was emotionally absent. The emotional weight of losing his wife seemed to paralyze him, and instead of comforting Chloe, he retreated into his work, unable to cope with the imminent loss. Chloe found herself alone in this battle. The man who had once been so focused on his empire and wealth now appeared like a ghost, his grief and inability to support his family pushing him further into isolation. Chloe had always relied on her mother for emotional support, but in this moment, she found herself carrying the weight of their family's grief on her shoulders alone. She would sit by her mother's bedside at the hospital, her heart breaking as she watched Eleanor's once bright eyes fade and the mother who had always been her pillar slowly slip away. Chloe's father seemed to distance himself further, unable to face the reality of his wife's impending death. Her older brother, Ethan, was no better. He had his own struggles, and while he did try to console Chloe from time to time, he wasn't equipped to handle the emotional toll of the situation. The loneliness Chloe experienced during her mother's battle with cancer was profound. The people she once relied on the most, the ones who had always been there for her, seemed to withdraw when she needed them the most. It was as though the absence of her mother had left a gaping hole in the family, one that no one seemed capable of filling. Chloe could not understand how her father, who had been so commanding and powerful in business, could now retreat into his own grief, leaving her to face this devastating loss without any emotional support. Chloe had always imagined that, no matter how dark things got, her mother would always be there to provide comfort. But she couldn't stop the inevitable. The day her mother passed away, Chloe felt as if her heart had been torn out. It wasn't just the death of her mother, it was the death of everything that had once felt safe in her life. The woman who had been the foundation of Chloe's world was gone, and with her went any semblance of stability or comfort Chloe had once known. Her mother's funeral was a blur of mournful faces and empty words of condolence. The quiet murmurs of the guests, as they whispered their sympathy, only heightened Chloe's sense of isolation. It was as if everyone around her was trying to fill a void that was simply too vast to be filled. Her father was there, of course, but in his own state of shock, he could barely manage to stand, let alone offer Chloe any emotional support. Her brother, Ethan, was still distant, unable to cope with the situation in a way that Chloe could understand. The house that had once been filled with the sound of laughter, stories, and love now felt cold and empty. Chloe wandered the halls, unable to escape the weight of grief pressing down on her chest. Her mother's absence was so palpable it seemed to echo through every room. Chloe couldn't imagine how she would ever fill that void. For the first time, she felt truly alone in the world. The months following her mother's death were the hardest Chloe had ever faced. The dreams and aspirations that had once seemed so attainable now felt like distant fantasies, trapped in a past that she could no longer reach. She tried to immerse herself in her work, focusing on her art and fashion, but the loss was always there, lurking in the back of her mind. She would wake in the middle of the night, her heart heavy with the weight of the emptiness her mother's death had left in her life. Despite the emotional toll, Chloe began to understand that she could not remain in this state of perpetual mourning. Her mother had always taught her the importance of resilience, of standing tall in the face of adversity, and of moving forward, no matter the circumstances. It was in this lesson that Chloe found the strength to continue. But even as she began to rebuild, the grief lingered, a constant companion she couldn't shake. The death of her mother marked the beginning of Chloe's emotional transformation. She began to reevaluate her life, her relationships, and her goals. Chloe realized that, in the face of all the loss, she had to create a new sense of self, one that was no longer dependent on her family's wealth or the people who had let her down. She had to find her own strength, her own sense of purpose, and in doing so, she began to heal. But healing was not a linear process. Chloe found herself struggling with her emotions, battling feelings of abandonment, loneliness, and guilt. She often asked herself why she had been left to carry such a heavy burden. Why had her father retreated when he was supposed to be there for her? Why had her mother, the one person who could always comfort her, been taken away so suddenly? These questions would linger in her mind, unanswered, as she navigated the complicated path to healing. Ultimately, Chloe realized that while the grief would always be a part of her, it didn't have to define her. Her mother's love and support had been a guiding light, and it was in that light that Chloe found her way out of the darkness. Slowly, but surely, Chloe began to rebuild her life one step at a time. And in this process, she found the courage to live again, to dream again, and to trust again. The death of her mother was the second of many challenges that Chloe would face, but it was also the catalyst for her transformation. Through the heartbreak and loss, Chloe discovered a new sense of resilience, one that would carry her through the trials that lay ahead. The third crisis, the family's secret to quiet, was unbearable. After her mother's death, Chloe Williams had become used to the silence that had fallen over her life. But this time, it wasn't the usual emptiness that had settled in. It was something darker, something that felt as though it had been waiting just beneath the surface for years. A secret. Chloe had spent weeks sorting through her mother's belongings, trying to make sense of the life Eleanor had lived and, perhaps, find some measure of closure. But in the midst of this personal process, she stumbled upon something unexpected, something that would change everything. It was a box hidden deep in the back of her mother's closet, behind old blankets and coats Chloe hadn't seen in years. The box was not particularly large, but it seemed strangely significant, as if it had been placed there with purpose. The box had an old-fashioned lock, which Chloe managed to open with ease. Inside, she found a series of files and documents, many of which were yellowed with age, others scribbled with her mother's handwriting. As Chloe sifted through the papers, her heart began to race. At first, they seemed like ordinary papers, financial records, family documents, and old letters, but then something caught her eye, a name. It was a name she recognized, and it immediately stopped her in her tracks. The name was tied to a case Chloe had heard about in passing years ago, a local murder case that had shaken the small town where Chloe had grown up. But there had always been confusion surrounding it. Some believed it was an accident, while others whispered of foul play, but no one had ever fully understood the details. As Chloe flipped through the pages, the truth began to unfold. Her mother, Eleanor, had been involved in a cover-up years ago, and Chloe was left stunned. The documents revealed that Eleanor had helped a close friend, someone she trusted, conceal the murder of a man. The situation had been complicated. Her mother had not been the one who committed the crime, but her involvement had been far from innocent. Eleanor had been an accomplice, someone who chose to hide the truth and protect her friend at the cost of her own integrity. Chloe's stomach churned as she read through the carefully concealed details of the case. Her mother, the woman who had always been a beacon of moral support, had been a part of something so dark, so far removed from the person Chloe had known. This wasn't just any cover-up. It was a long-standing secret that had been buried for years, and now, Chloe had found the key to unlock it. The implications were staggering. Her mother's actions had unknowingly led to a series of events that Chloe was only now beginning to understand. The murder, the cover-up, and the guilt, it all connected, and suddenly Chloe's mother was no longer the person she had once believed her to be. The shock of it hit her like a physical blow. As Chloe continued to read through the documents, she learned that Eleanor's involvement in the cover-up had been a result of her loyalty to a childhood friend, someone Chloe had always known as a distant figure in their family's past. This person, a man named Gregory Wells, had been accused of murdering his business partner years ago during a financial dispute. Though Gregory had claimed the killing was in self-defense, the truth was never fully established. Eleanor had been his confidant, the person who had helped him avoid justice. It turned out that Gregory had paid off local officials and manipulated evidence to ensure his freedom, all while Eleanor silently helped him cover his tracks. Chloe could barely process what she was reading. How could her mother have been involved in such a grave act? And what was she supposed to do with this newfound information? Her first instinct was to shut the box and pretend she had never found it, to continue her life as if nothing had changed. But that wasn't who Chloe was. She had spent so many years trying to find herself and overcome the weight of her family's broken past, only to discover that her mother, the one person who had always told her to seek the truth, had been hiding a dark and ugly secret of her own. The questions began to flood Chloe's mind. Should she confront the truth? Should she expose her mother's involvement, knowing that it could ruin her reputation forever? What would the world think of the woman she had adored, the mother who had been her rock? Chloe understood that her mother had made a decision in her youth that might have seemed justifiable at the time, but the gravity of that decision could not be ignored now. If she brought the secret to light, the family's name would be tarnished. Chloe would lose the last thread of the stability she had worked so hard to rebuild after the bankruptcy and her mother's death. Yet, Chloe also knew the cost of silence. She had spent so much time trying to escape the shadows of her past, and now it seemed that those shadows were closing in on her once more. The idea of protecting her mother's reputation felt right, but was it fair to others who had been impacted by the crime? What about Gregory Wells, the man who had avoided the consequences of his actions all these years? Chloe sat back, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. The dilemma was complicated. On one hand, keeping her mother's secret might provide her with some sense of peace, a way to preserve the memory of the woman she had loved. On the other hand, revealing the truth would mean facing the consequences, and Chloe wasn't sure she was ready for that. How would the people around her react? Would they view her as a traitor to her family, or would they admire her courage to expose the truth? As Chloe spent the following days in a haze of confusion, she began to look for answers from people who might have known the truth. She contacted old family friends and colleagues who had known her mother well, hoping they could offer insight into the situation. Some were sympathetic, others were shocked, but all of them agreed that Chloe had to make the decision for herself. "The truth will set you free," one of her mother's old friends told her, but Chloe wasn't sure it would set her free. In fact, it felt like the truth would only bind her further, creating a chain of responsibility she wasn't sure she was prepared to carry. In the end, Chloe made the difficult decision to confront Gregory Wells, hoping that by speaking with him directly, she could gain some clarity. She reached out to him, but he was unwilling to meet with her. Instead, he sent her a letter in which he expressed his regret for what had happened, but he also warned her that digging into the past could only bring more pain. "Your mother did what she thought was best at the time," he wrote. "Sometimes, the past is better left where it belongs." Despite his warnings, Chloe couldn't leave the matter unresolved. She knew that if she didn't confront the truth, it would continue to haunt her, just as the bankruptcy of her family had. She understood that there was no easy way out, but she also realized that she needed to choose a path forward, one that allowed her to reclaim her identity, regardless of the consequences. Chloe's decision, whatever it may be, would shape the future she was so desperately trying to rebuild. The weight of the past was heavy, but Chloe knew she couldn't let it define her forever. She had to learn how to live with the truth, no matter how painful it might be. She wasn't just fighting for her mother's legacy anymore. She was fighting for her own future. And in that future, she would decide what kind of person she wanted to be, someone defined by the shadows of the past, or someone capable of facing the truth head-on, no matter the cost. The encounter with Ethan Matthews, the bright lights of New York City reflected off the sleek, polished surfaces of the streets as Chloe Williams walked along the sidewalk. It was a warm afternoon, the kind of day where the sun bathed the city in golden hues, and the air felt like a promise of something new. Chloe had spent the last few weeks trying to regain control of her life after the emotional turmoil of her family's financial collapse and the deep shock of her mother's death. Despite everything, she found herself waking up every day determined to carve out a fresh start. But the path was far from easy, and with every step, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her past pulling her back. It was on this particular day that Chloe's life would take yet another unexpected turn. While walking to a local cafe, she found herself in front of a luxurious boutique. Its floor-to-ceiling windows displayed the latest in high-end fashion, and Chloe paused for a moment to admire the impeccable designs, as she had once done before her life was uprooted. She remembered the days when fashion had been her world, when she had been surrounded by the colors, textures, and fabrics that brought her so much joy. As she stood there, lost in her thoughts, a familiar voice cut through the noise of the bustling city. "Chloe, is that you?" Startled, Chloe turned around and found herself face-to-face with none other than Ethan Matthews, a name she hadn't thought about in years. Ethan Matthews was a renowned millionaire in the fashion industry, a visionary who had made a name for himself with his groundbreaking designs and impeccable taste. He had been a guest at one of the events she attended years ago, but back then, they had exchanged only brief pleasantries. In fact, Chloe hadn't expected to ever see him again. But here he was, smiling at her with the same warmth she remembered. "Well, if it isn't Chloe Williams," Ethan said, his voice rich with amusement. "I never thought I'd run into you on the streets of New York. What a pleasant surprise." Chloe smiled, albeit a little awkwardly. "Ethan, I didn't expect to see you either. What are you doing here?" Ethan shrugged, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his tailored suit. "I live not far from here, and I often stroll down this block. But it's rare to run into someone I know, especially someone with a history in fashion. How have you been?" Chloe paused, unsure of how much she wanted to reveal. She knew that Ethan had been a part of the elite crowd that had attended the high society events she had once been a part of, but she also knew that her life had changed drastically since then. Her mother's death and the bankruptcy had shaken her to her core, and Chloe wasn't ready to dive into her personal struggles with someone like Ethan. "I'm doing okay," she said, opting for the safe route. "Just trying to get back on my feet, you know." Ethan studied her for a moment, as if trying to read between the lines of her words. Chloe knew she hadn't completely masked her feelings, but she was relieved that he didn't press for more details. Instead, he smiled warmly and gestured for her to join him for coffee. "Let's catch up," he said. "There's a cafe right around the corner." "My treat." Chloe hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Maybe this was a sign that her life was finally starting to take a positive turn. Ethan Matthews was a prominent figure in the fashion world, and meeting him again could open new doors for her. Besides, she needed someone to talk to, someone who didn't know the depths of her struggles. Ethan was the perfect candidate, a man who seemed to have it all, and yet she could sense that there was more to him than just his wealth and status. The cafe they walked into was intimate and cozy, with dim lighting and a soft buzz of conversation from other patrons. Chloe followed Ethan to a small table near the window, where they could enjoy the view of the busy street outside. They sat down, and Chloe ordered a cappuccino, while Ethan opted for his usual espresso. As they sipped their drinks, the conversation naturally turned to their lives. Ethan shared that his fashion empire was thriving, with new projects and collaborations on the horizon. Chloe listened intently, admiring his passion for his work. There was a spark in his eyes as he spoke about his business, and Chloe couldn't help but be drawn to his enthusiasm. She hadn't realized how much she had missed the excitement of the fashion world, the very world she once dreamed of conquering. But it wasn't just Ethan's professional success that intrigued her. It was the way he spoke with such sincerity and warmth. There was no pretension in his voice, no sense of superiority. He seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say, and for the first time in a long while, Chloe felt like someone truly cared about her as a person, not just for her potential or her family status. "I've been following your work," Ethan said after a pause, as he took a sip of his espresso. "I remember seeing your sketches at that charity event years ago. You've got talent, Chloe. I always thought you'd go far in the industry." Chloe smiled, though it felt bittersweet. Her dreams of becoming a designer had been dashed when her family's finances crumbled. But Ethan's words were a spark, reigniting a tiny flame inside her. Maybe it wasn't too late to chase those dreams again. "Thank you, Ethan," Chloe replied softly. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to get back to that place, though. A lot has happened since then. I've lost everything: my family, my home, my direction." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes focused on her with a sense of understanding that made Chloe feel like she could open up more than she had with anyone in a long time. "I get it," he said gently. "Life can knock you down in ways you don't expect. But sometimes the most beautiful things come from the darkest places. You have an opportunity to rebuild yourself, Chloe. You don't have to give up on your dreams just because of what happened." Chloe felt a pang of emotion as she looked at him. His words hit home in a way she hadn't anticipated. For so long, she had been drowning in guilt and regret, feeling as though she didn't deserve another chance. But here was Ethan, someone who had no reason to offer her anything but advice, yet he was doing so with kindness and belief in her potential. "Maybe you're right," Chloe replied, her voice steady now. "But it's hard to see the light when everything around you is so dark." Ethan smiled, a soft but reassuring smile. "It's okay to be scared, Chloe. It's okay to not have everything figured out right now. But you don't have to do it alone." Those words hung in the air, and Chloe felt something shift inside her. Ethan wasn't just offering words of encouragement. He was offering a connection, an understanding that she hadn't experienced in a long time. Slowly, over the next few hours, their conversation evolved into something deeper. They shared stories about their pasts, their challenges, and their hopes for the future. Chloe learned that Ethan had faced his own struggles, particularly with the pressures of running his business and the loneliness that came with it. Despite his success, Ethan confessed that there were moments when he felt just as lost and uncertain as she did. As the conversation continued, Chloe realized that Ethan's friendship wasn't just born out of sympathy or casual interest. There was a genuine bond forming between them, one based on mutual respect and a shared desire to rebuild. Chloe felt as though she had found someone who truly saw her not just as a woman from a broken family, but as an individual with dreams and aspirations that were still worth pursuing. By the end of their meeting, Chloe felt lighter, more hopeful than she had in months. Ethan Matthews had given her more than just words of encouragement. He had given her the confidence to start thinking about her future again. Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something special, a friendship that could turn into something more, or maybe a professional partnership that could reignite the dreams she had put aside for so long. As they parted ways, Ethan gave her one last reassuring smile. "Remember, Chloe, you're not alone in this. You have more potential than you realize, and I'm here to help however I can." With those words echoing in her mind, Chloe walked away from the cafe, a small but significant step toward reclaiming the future she thought she had lost forever. She knew that whatever happened next, this encounter with Ethan Matthews was a turning point, a sign that things might just be starting to look up again. Blossoming feelings after their heartfelt conversation at the cafe, Chloe found herself reflecting more on Ethan's words than she had expected. In a world where everything seemed so uncertain and frail, his kindness and understanding felt like a lifeline. Despite the chaos of her past and the weight of everything she had lost, Ethan Matthews, a man who had every reason to stay distant, had shown genuine care for her. Chloe was confused, yet strangely comforted. Could she truly trust him? Was his offer to help her rebuild just that help, or was there something more to it? Ethan's actions over the next few weeks provided answers to many of her questions. He didn't just leave Chloe to figure things out on her own. He rolled up his sleeves and dove into helping her get back on her feet. He connected her with contacts in the fashion industry, some old friends who were now successful designers, others who ran boutique stores, and even influential fashion bloggers who could give Chloe's vision the exposure it so desperately needed. One day, not long after their first meeting, Ethan invited Chloe to a local fashion show he was hosting in collaboration with some of the biggest names in the business. The event was a stunning display of creativity, filled with glamorous models and exquisite designs, a stark contrast to Chloe's current reality of uncertainty and loss. As the evening unfolded, Chloe couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. The world she had once dreamed of, the world where she was celebrated for her designs, was all around her, yet it felt so distant. The laughter, the flashbulbs from photographers, the discussions over champagne, it was the life she had longed for, the life she had worked so hard to enter before everything came crashing down. And yet, in the midst of it all, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling of insecurity, the sense of being an imposter in a room full of people who belonged here, who had never experienced the fall she had. Ethan noticed her quiet distress, and without skipping a beat, he led her backstage. "You don't have to hide from your own success," he said quietly, guiding her to a quiet corner away from the buzz of the event. "You belong here, Chloe. This is your world, and you've got all the tools you need to make it your own again." Chloe's throat tightened as she struggled to hold back the tears. She had spent so much of her life trying to live up to the expectations of others, including her family. And now, standing here with Ethan, she realized that she didn't need to prove anything. He believed in her, and for the first time in a long time, Chloe allowed herself to believe in her own worth. However, despite the warmth Ethan showed her, Chloe couldn't shake her doubts. Ethan was a man who had been successful for years, a man with his own history, and Chloe couldn't help but wonder what was he hiding. She was grateful for his help, but she needed more than just professional advice and financial support. She needed to understand who Ethan really was. After all, people didn't offer this level of support without a reason, and Chloe wasn't one to ignore her instincts. There was something about Ethan that seemed too perfect, too polished, like a man who had learned to keep parts of himself hidden beneath layers of charm and charisma. One evening, after a long day of meetings and brainstorming sessions, Chloe found herself sitting with Ethan in the back of a trendy rooftop bar overlooking the sparkling skyline of New York. The night was warm, the air buzzing with conversation and the clinking of glasses. Ethan had suggested they unwind after a productive day, and Chloe had agreed. As they sipped on their drinks, a sense of camaraderie had begun to develop between them. They spoke about everything and nothing about Chloe's childhood dreams, Ethan's journey to the top of the fashion industry, and their shared love for the creative process. Yet Chloe couldn't fully relax. The question that had been lingering in her mind for weeks finally slipped out. "Ethan, can I ask you something personal?" Chloe's voice was soft, almost hesitant. She hadn't intended to bring this up, but the words escaped her before she could stop them. Ethan raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into a small smile. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Chloe set down her glass, meeting his gaze. "I appreciate everything you've done for me, truly. But I can't shake the feeling that there's something you're not telling me. What's your story, Ethan? I know you've been successful, but is there more to it than that? Why are you helping me so much?" Ethan paused, his eyes narrowing slightly, as though weighing his next words carefully. "I've never been one to talk about my past much," he admitted after a moment, his voice steady but with a slight edge. "But I'll tell you this. I've learned from my mistakes. I made a lot of them more than I care to admit. And, in some ways, I see a lot of myself in you. That's why I'm helping you." Chloe frowned, trying to make sense of his response. She knew he was hiding something, and it frustrated her. "But why me?" she pressed. "Why go out of your way to invest in someone like me when there are so many other people who need your help?" Ethan let out a deep sigh and took another sip of his drink before responding. "Maybe it's because you remind me of who I was before all of this. Before the success, the fame, the luxury. I was once like you, lost, unsure of what came next. I know how it feels to want something more, to reach for your dreams, but be trapped by your past. Helping you isn't just about paying it forward, it's about giving you the same chance I got. The chance to rebuild, to start over, and to make something beautiful out of a life that feels like it's been shattered." Chloe's heart skipped a beat at his words. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, but there was still a part of her that felt unsure. His offer was so generous, and yet it felt like there was an unspoken truth between them, a truth that, if revealed, could change everything. But for the first time in months, Chloe allowed herself to believe that Ethan wasn't like the others. He wasn't trying to control her, manipulate her, or use her for his own gain. Ethan Matthews, in his own mysterious way, was showing her the kind of support she hadn't known she needed, and it felt like a beacon of hope in a world that had once been so dark. As the night wore on, the bond between them grew stronger. They spoke more openly about their fears, their aspirations, and their vulnerabilities. Chloe found herself laughing more than she had in a long time, and the weight of her troubles seemed to lessen in Ethan's presence. The foundation of trust that had slowly formed between them felt fragile, but it was enough to give Chloe hope. In the following weeks, Ethan's support continued to pour in. He helped Chloe find a new space to create, a place where she could once again pour her heart into designing. Slowly but surely, Chloe began to regain her confidence. She started to take small steps toward her dream, making connections and setting up meetings with potential collaborators. She was still far from where she wanted to be, but with Ethan by her side, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild her life. Yet, despite her growing feelings for him, Chloe couldn't shake the need to know more about Ethan's past. She needed to understand why he was so willing to help her, what he had been through, and whether she could truly trust him with the broken pieces of her own heart. Her journey to healing was just beginning, and as much as she wanted to believe in the possibility of love and new beginnings, Chloe knew she had to confront the truth about Ethan Matthews before she could fully open her heart to him. The discovery of Ethan's past. Chloe had spent weeks under the illusion that her connection with Ethan Matthews was rooted purely in his desire to help her rebuild her life. After all, his actions had been nothing short of generous, and his unwavering support made her believe that she had finally found someone who saw her potential and understood her struggles. Yet, as time went on, Chloe began to notice subtle signs, small things that didn't quite add up, things that made her question whether Ethan's intentions were as pure as they seemed. The first hint came on a typical Tuesday afternoon, when Chloe received a call from her father, Michael Williams. His voice was colder than usual, and there was an odd, almost defensive tone to his words as he asked about her current situation. Chloe, who hadn't spoken to her father in months, was taken aback by the abruptness of the conversation. She tried to keep things civil, updating him on her progress and her plans for the future. But then, out of nowhere, her father mentioned Ethan's name. "You're working with Ethan Matthews now, I hear," Michael said, his voice hard. "I never thought I'd see the day." Chloe froze, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean by that?" she asked cautiously. "Oh, nothing," he replied, his tone dismissive. "I just thought you'd know better than to get involved with him. He's always had an agenda, Chloe. He's not the man he pretends to be." The words hung in the air like a cloud of doubt. Chloe had always believed that her father's bitterness was the result of his failed business ventures and the crushing weight of his own disappointment. But this was different. Her father knew something about Ethan that Chloe didn't. She couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease, a sensation that gnawed at her gut. That night, Chloe sat alone in her apartment, unable to shake the unsettling feeling that had taken root in her heart. She hadn't expected her father to be the source of doubt, but now that the seed of suspicion had been planted, it was all she could think about. Could it really be true? Was Ethan involved with her for reasons other than his supposed kindness? Or had he been playing a long game, using her vulnerability for his own strategic purposes? Unable to sleep, Chloe decided to confront Ethan. She had to get to the bottom of this, no matter how difficult the conversation might be. She knew she couldn't live in a cloud of doubt, especially when it came to someone who had become so important to her. She needed the truth. The next morning, after a busy day of meetings and preparations for her upcoming fashion collection, Chloe met Ethan for dinner at his favorite restaurant. The soft lighting of the dining room, the clinking of glasses, and the hum of quiet conversations in the background did little to calm Chloe's nerves. As they sat across from each other, she could feel the tension building within her. Ethan, as always, was his usual charming self. He smiled at Chloe, asking about her day, his eyes warm and attentive. But Chloe's thoughts were far from the conversation at hand. Her mind kept racing back to the phone call with her father and the cryptic warning about Ethan's true nature. She had to know the truth. "Ethan," Chloe began, her voice hesitant but firm, "there's something I need to ask you. It's important." Ethan put down his glass of wine, his eyes meeting hers with a look of genuine concern. "What's on your mind?" Chloe took a deep breath, steadying herself. "My father mentioned something about you and him. He said you two have a history, and that I shouldn't trust you. He said you've always had an agenda." Ethan's face remained calm, but Chloe could see a flicker of something and emotion quickly masked. He was silent for a moment, as though weighing how to respond. "You've spoken to your father?" Ethan asked, his voice steady but with an edge that Chloe had never heard before. Chloe nodded. "Yes, and he said some things that don't sit right with me. He said you were involved in some business dealings with him in the past." "What's going on, Ethan? What's the real reason you're helping me?" There was a long pause. Chloe could feel the weight of the question hanging between them, and she couldn't help but notice the change in Ethan's demeanor. His warm, caring expression had shifted, his features now steely and unreadable. Ethan took a deep breath before answering, his voice low. "I didn't want you to find out like this, Chloe, but I guess I owe you the truth. My relationship with your father isn't exactly one of mutual respect. We've had dealings in the past, business deals that didn't go as planned. Your father's investments were, let's just say, less than reputable. And when everything fell apart, I was one of the people who helped clean up the mess. I've worked with him, and I've tried to help him out of sticky situations more than once." Chloe's heart sank. She had always known that her family's financial troubles had a darker side, but hearing Ethan's words felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just that her father was involved in questionable deals, it was that Ethan, the man she had come to trust, had been part of it all along. "But I didn't come here to make business deals with you, Chloe," Ethan continued, his voice softening. "I've been trying to help you because I see something in you. I see someone who's been broken, someone who's still fighting, and I admire that. I never wanted to hurt you." Chloe's mind was spinning. The revelations were too much to process in one sitting. She wanted to believe Ethan, wanted to hold on to the image of the kind, supportive man she had come to care for. But how could she reconcile this with the truth that he had been involved with her father, a man who had caused so much pain in her life? Her heart wavered as she looked into Ethan's eyes. Was it possible that he was telling the truth, that he truly cared for her and only wanted to help? Or was this just another layer of deception, another way for him to secure his own interests? Chloe stood up abruptly, the weight of the conversation pressing on her chest. "I need some time to think about this, Ethan," she said quietly, her voice trembling. Ethan reached out to her, his expression a mixture of regret and longing. "Chloe, please don't shut me out. I've never been completely honest with you about my past, but I'm trying to be now. Just give me a chance to explain everything." Chloe turned away, her emotions a tangled mess. She didn't know what to believe anymore, and the trust she had built with Ethan felt shattered in an instant. As she walked out of the restaurant, the city lights blurred in front of her, and she realized that the road ahead was no longer as clear as it once seemed. The discovery of Ethan's past had left Chloe grappling with a mix of emotions. The man she had come to depend on for comfort and guidance had secrets that changed everything. And now, Chloe had to decide whether to continue trusting Ethan or to distance herself and protect her heart from further harm. The search for the truth, Chloe sat in her apartment, her hands trembling as she held the letter in her hands, the one that had been left to her by her mother in the will. The contents of the letter had shocked her to the core. Her mother had been involved in something far darker than Chloe had ever imagined: a crime, a murder that had been buried beneath years of silence. A story that was no longer just a relic of the past, but something that was now very much alive, something that demanded her attention and ultimately her action. She had spent the past week in a state of disbelief, the words from the letter replaying over and over in her mind. It was all too much to comprehend. The woman who had been her unwavering support, her rock through thick and thin, had carried the burden of a terrible secret, a secret that had cost someone their life. But Chloe wasn't one to back down from a challenge. She had faced setbacks before, lost everything, and clawed her way back from rock bottom. Now, the stakes were higher than they had ever been before. She wasn't just searching for a new direction in life anymore, she was hunting for the truth. The truth about her mother's past and the consequences of the choices that had been made. She had to know why her mother had been involved, what had driven her to cover up such a heinous crime, and most importantly, what it meant for Chloe's future. The path to uncovering the truth wasn't going to be easy. Chloe had no idea where to start, and with every step she took, the weight of her family's dark history seemed to press down on her. She had inherited a legacy she never knew existed, a legacy that would change the course of her life forever. The first stop on her journey was the local courthouse. She knew that somewhere in the labyrinth of legal records, there would be documents that could give her answers. Chloe was prepared for the bureaucracy, for the cold faces of officials who would undoubtedly treat her as just another person looking for answers. But she was determined. With the letter in her hands and a heart full of uncertainty, she stepped into the building. The clerk behind the desk gave her a curt nod when she explained what she was looking for. "You're going to have to fill out a request form. The case is old, but we can dig it up for you," the clerk said, pointing her to a nearby desk. Chloe sat down, the pen feeling heavy in her hand as she filled out the required paperwork. It felt like the first of many steps she would have to take, a small, insignificant movement toward a much larger truth. As she handed the paperwork back, the clerk eyed her with a knowing look. "Are you sure you want to do this, Miss Williams? Some things, once uncovered, can never be put back in the box." Chloe swallowed hard. "I'm sure." The clerk didn't say another word. As Chloe waited for the documents to be retrieved, her thoughts wandered to her mother. Had she ever thought about the consequences of what she had done? Or had she simply been too caught up in her own fear and guilt to understand the weight of her actions? Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to uncover something much darker than what was written in that letter. 2 hours later, Chloe stood before the desk again, holding a thick file of papers in her hands. Her palms were clammy, and she could feel the weight of the years that had passed pressing down on her. She thanked the clerk and walked out of the courthouse, feeling as though the ground beneath her was shifting with every step. Back in her apartment, Chloe spread the papers out on the coffee table, her heart racing as she began to read. The documents detailed the events surrounding the murder, how her mother had been involved in the cover-up, how the crime had been dismissed, and how the authorities had turned a blind eye to the truth. But what shocked Chloe most wasn't just the fact that her mother had been involved, it was the names of the people who had helped conceal the truth. Her mother had been part of a group, a web of complicity, with people who were still very much alive today. One name, in particular, stood out: Thomas Avery. He was listed as a key figure in the cover-up. Chloe's heart skipped a beat. Thomas Avery was a name from her past, someone her mother had often spoken about, but only in passing. He had been a close family friend, someone who had always been around during Chloe's childhood. She had always thought of him as a charming, wealthy businessman, someone who could do no wrong. But now, he was a part of a much darker story, and Chloe's gut told her that he knew more about her mother's involvement than anyone else. Determined to get answers, Chloe set out to find Thomas Avery. She wasn't sure what she would say to him, or even if he would speak to her, but she couldn't let this trail go cold. She needed to know the full extent of her mother's involvement, and Thomas Avery was the key. The search for Thomas Avery took Chloe to a part of the city she had never ventured to before, an exclusive, upscale neighborhood that felt far removed from the life she had once known. The towering mansions, the neatly trimmed lawns, and the pristine streets stood in stark contrast to the apartment she now called home. This was a world that Chloe had once been a part of, but it felt so foreign now. After several failed attempts to reach him by phone, Chloe decided to visit his estate in person. The large gates at the front of the property loomed in front of her, and as she rang the doorbell, she couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. She had no idea how Thomas would react to seeing her, or if he would even acknowledge her presence. But she couldn't stop now. She needed answers. When the door finally opened, Chloe was met by a woman who looked at her curiously. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. "I'm looking for Mr. Avery," Chloe said, her voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling inside her. The woman hesitated, then stepped aside. "Wait here," she said, before disappearing into the house. Minutes passed before Thomas Avery appeared in the doorway. His once boyish charm had been replaced with the cool, calculated demeanor of a man who had spent years hiding his secrets. Chloe's heart pounded in her chest as she faced him. This was the man who held the key to the dark history of her family, and she had come to demand the truth. "Chloe Williams," he said, his voice smooth, though there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "It's been a long time." Chloe squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze. "I need to know what happened. I know you were involved in what my mother did, and I need you to tell me everything." Thomas hesitated, and for a moment, Chloe saw something in his eyes, a flicker of fear. But then he composed himself, his face hardening. "I don't know what you think you know, but I can tell you this. It's not what you think," he said, his voice low and guarded. Chloe pressed on. "Then tell me, Thomas. Tell me what happened to my mother, and why she did what she did." The conversation that followed was long and fraught with tension. Thomas didn't offer up the truth easily, but Chloe could see that he was reluctant to keep lying. Piece by piece, he started to divulge the details, and as the truth began to unfold, Chloe realized that her mother had been trapped in a web of lies, trapped by people she had trusted, including Thomas Avery. The truth Chloe uncovered wasn't just about a murder. It was about betrayal, guilt, and the impossible choices that her mother had made. But more than that, it was about Chloe's own journey of self-discovery. In searching for the truth about her mother, Chloe had begun to confront the darkness in her own life, and in doing so, she had found the strength to move forward. As Chloe left Thomas Avery's estate, her mind raced with everything she had just learned. The truth had come at a cost, but it was a cost she was willing to pay. She had started this journey looking for answers about her mother, but what she had found was something far more profound, the key to her own healing. The road ahead would not be easy, and Chloe knew that there were more challenges to come. But now, at least, she had the truth. And with it, she could finally begin to rebuild not just her career, but her life. The big decision. Chloe stood by the window in her apartment, staring out at the bustling city of New York. The lights flickered below, casting shadows across the buildings, yet her mind was a tumult of thoughts, conflicting, overwhelming, and persistent. The truth she had uncovered about her mother had shaken her to the core. Her mother, the woman who had always been her rock, the one who had sacrificed everything for her family, had kept a secret so deep, so dark, it threatened to destroy everything Chloe knew about her. The letter, the files, the quiet conversations with Thomas Avery, it was all a tangled web of betrayal, fear, and moral choices that no one should ever have to make. But now, Chloe faced the hardest decision of her life. Should she expose the truth? Should she risk everything, her family, her career, her future, just to bring light to the darkness of the past? The decision weighed heavily on her heart. Her mother had been involved in a murder cover-up. She had helped hide the truth, protected those who should have been brought to justice. But Chloe couldn't ignore the fact that her mother had done so out of love, out of fear, out of a desire to protect her family. Wasn't that what a mother was supposed to do? Love fiercely, even at the cost of her own soul? Chloe felt torn. On the one hand, she understood the need to protect her family. She understood why her mother had made the choices she did. It wasn't easy for Chloe to admit, but in some way, she could relate. The pressure of family expectations, the desire to keep up appearances, the fear of losing everything, it was a pressure that weighed on her own shoulders. Was it any wonder that her mother had made the choices she did? But on the other hand, Chloe knew that by keeping this secret, they were allowing the past to continue to haunt them. Every lie, every cover-up, every omission only added another layer of guilt, another chain that bound Chloe to the past. How could she live with herself if she didn't do something to correct the wrongs, to clear the air, and to give her mother the justice she never got in life? As the hours passed, Chloe became more and more certain of one thing. The truth was more than just a revelation. It was a path to freedom. The longer she kept the secret, the more it would destroy her family. Her mother had made the choice to cover up the past, but now it was Chloe's turn to choose what to do with that truth. The dilemma was not just about justice, though. It was about Chloe's sense of self. She had spent so long trying to keep her own life together, rebuilding after her family's bankruptcy, trying to salvage her career, and navigating her tumultuous relationship with Ethan. But what had she been building it all on? A foundation built on lies? If she exposed the truth, Chloe feared she would lose everything. Her family's reputation, her own sense of stability, her relationship with Ethan, everything could crumble, and she would be left alone, facing the consequences of her actions. But in the quiet of her apartment, as she looked out at the city that had once seemed so full of promise, Chloe realized that she could no longer live in the shadow of her mother's choices. She had spent her whole life trying to make her family proud, to live up to their expectations, but at what cost? She had buried her own dreams, her own desires, just to fit into the mold they had created for her. Now, she had the chance to break free, to live her own truth, even if it meant exposing the darkest parts of her family's history. The phone buzzed, pulling Chloe from her thoughts. It was a message from Ethan. He had been patient with her, always supportive, even as she struggled to open up about the secrets that weighed on her. He had helped her rebuild her career, had been by her side through thick and thin. But even with his support, Chloe knew that she couldn't keep hiding from the truth. She had to decide whether to let the truth come to light, regardless of the consequences. As Chloe picked up the phone, she felt a surge of emotion, love for Ethan, gratitude for his presence in her life, but also a deep sense of fear. Would he still stand by her if he knew everything? Would he be able to accept the woman she was, flaws and all? Her fingers hovered over the screen, But Chloe hesitated. She couldn't share the truth with Ethan, yet not without first making the decision for herself. The fear of rejection was real. The fear that she would lose everything was paralyzing. But deep down, Chloe knew that this was the only way forward. She couldn't continue to live in the shadow of her mother's mistakes. She couldn't keep protecting the family at the cost of her own peace. Taking a deep breath, Chloe tapped out a message. "I need to talk to you, Ethan. It's important." She sent the message, and immediately the fear hit her again. What if Ethan couldn't handle it? What if he judged her for the sins of her mother, for the legacy that she had inherited? Chloe didn't have answers yet, but she knew one thing. She couldn't keep running from the truth. Hours later, as Chloe prepared to meet Ethan, she reflected on everything she had learned. Her mother had acted out of love, out of fear, and out of need to protect her family. But in doing so, she had made decisions that had irrevocably altered their lives. Chloe was standing at a crossroads, where every decision she made would shape the future. Exposing the truth could bring clarity, but it could also destroy everything she had worked to rebuild. At that moment, Chloe realized that her mother's actions had been a reflection of the pressure of living a life defined by success and appearances. And now, it was Chloe's turn to decide whether she would continue down that same path or forge a new one based on authenticity, on truth, and on a commitment to live her life as her own, free from the chains of the past. As Chloe walked out of her apartment to meet Ethan, she knew that the truth had to come out, but she wasn't sure what it would cost her. Would she be able to handle the fallout? Would Ethan still be there to support her? She didn't know, but she was willing to face whatever came her way. After all, what was the point of living in a world built on lies when she had the chance to step into the light, no matter how painful that might be? The truth was coming, and Chloe was ready to face it, no matter what it would mean for her family, her future, or her relationship with Ethan. She had to be strong, not just for herself, but for the family she still loved. The decision had been made. The consequences were yet to unfold. Confronting her father, Chloe had never imagined that she would find herself in this position, standing in front of her father, demanding answers to questions that had haunted her for years. But here she was, in the dimly lit office of the penthouse she had once called home, the place where she grew up with her family's wealth and status, now feeling more like a cage than a sanctuary. Her father, Richard Williams, sat across from her at the polished oak desk, his face a mask of both frustration and guilt. Chloe's heart pounded in her chest, a wave of emotion crashing over her, and her hands trembled, betraying the fear she was trying so hard to suppress. "Dad, I need to know the truth," Chloe began, her voice steady but strained. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, but now that it was happening, she felt a mix of dread and determination. The past had finally caught up with them both, and she was no longer willing to hide behind the walls of silence and half-truths that had kept her family intact, or so she had thought. Richard looked away, his eyes flickering with unease as if he had expected this moment to come, but hadn't truly prepared for it. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, trying to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. "Chloe, you don't understand. This isn't the time for this. There are complicated things about the past that are better left alone." Chloe's chest tightened as she took a deep breath. "No, I do understand. I understand more than you think. I've spent my whole life watching you play by your rules, manipulating everything to maintain the image of success. But now I know the truth, and I need you to tell me what happened." She threw a folder onto the desk, the papers inside clinking with a heavy weight. There were copies of the documents. She had uncovered evidence of the cover-up surrounding her mother's involvement in the murder case all those years ago. The realization of what her mother had done, and why, was slowly unraveling the very fabric of Chloe's family life. Richard's eyes fell on the papers, and for a moment, he seemed frozen. He wasn't shocked, not by Chloe's accusations, but by the weight of his own guilt. He had known this day would come. In fact, he had been preparing for it in his own way for years. But now, seeing the consequences laid bare on the table, he knew there was no escaping the truth. "Chloe," he finally said, his voice low and strained, "I didn't want you to know about this. I try to protect you from it, to keep you safe. Your mother, she did what she thought was right. I tried to help her, and we both agreed that it was better to hide the past. For your sake, for the family's sake. Chloe stared at him, her mind racing with anger and confusion. For my sake? How is keeping secrets for my sake? How could you think hiding the truth would protect me? This has ruined everything, the family, our lives, and even my own future. How could you live with this? How could you ask me to live with this? Her father's face darkened as his shoulders sagged under the weight of his years of decisions. His eyes closed briefly as if he were trying to block out the guilt that had followed him for so long. I didn't want to destroy everything, Chloe. Your mother, she was scared. She made mistakes, but she was trying to protect us. I thought I could fix it, make sure you didn't suffer the consequences of our actions. I thought I could give you everything you wanted. But you didn't, Dad, Chloe said, her voice shaking. You gave me everything I didn't need and took away everything that mattered. You gave me the money, the success, the image of a perfect life, but you took away my sense of trust. You took away our family's integrity. There was a long silence between them, the words hanging in the air like an unspeakable truth. Chloe could see it now. The man who had always been larger than life to her was now nothing more than a fragile man consumed by the weight of his past. The empire he had built, the world he had shown her as a child, was crumbling around him, and there was no one left to protect him. Chloe felt a mixture of relief and sorrow, realizing that her father, the man who had always seemed invincible, was not the hero she had once believed him to be. I know I failed you, Richard said, his voice breaking. I thought I was doing the right thing. I wanted to protect you from the fallout, from the pain. But I see now that the worst thing I did was lie to you. And I'm sorry, Chloe. I should have been honest with you from the beginning. Chloe swallowed hard, the sting of his apology cutting deep. It was almost too late for these words. After everything, after the years of deceit, the facade of perfection, how could this apology possibly make a difference? But Chloe knew that, despite everything, she still loved her father. And while the foundation of their relationship had been broken, the cracks still held remnants of the connection they had once shared. I don't know if I can forgive you, Dad, Chloe whispered, her voice thick with emotion. But I need to know the truth. You owe me that much. You owe my mother that much. And you owe yourself the chance to live with honesty for once. Richard nodded slowly, his eyes welling with tears. I'm ready to tell you everything, Chloe. I've been running from this for too long. It's time to face it. And so, Chloe listened, as her father recounted the decisions that had led to the cover-up, the guilt that had eaten away at him for years. She began to understand. Richard had been a man driven by ambition and fear of losing the life he had built, fear of his family's downfall. In a moment of weakness, he had chosen to bury the truth, hoping it would never resurface. But Chloe now realized that burying the truth only made it fester, and that the only way forward was to face it. Her father spoke of the night her mother had made the decision to hide the truth, of the threats they had received, of the fear that had paralyzed them. Chloe's heart ached as she listened, the anger she had felt now mingling with a deep sense of empathy. She could understand why they had made those choices. No one, not even her mother, was perfect, but understanding didn't mean she could forgive. Not yet. When her father finally fell silent, Chloe sat back, processing the weight of everything she had just heard. The anger that had fueled her rage had now been replaced with a quiet sorrow. The man she had once seen as her protector, her pillar of strength, was nothing more than a man who had made choices, just as she had. But those choices had shattered their world. I have to go, Chloe said softly, standing up. I need to think. I need time to figure out what comes next. Her father nodded, his face a mixture of guilt and acceptance. Take all the time you need. I'm here, Chloe. I'll be here when you're ready. As Chloe left the room, her mind was in turmoil. She had come here for answers, but now she felt more lost than ever. The truth had been revealed, but it wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a journey to heal, to rebuild, and to find a new path forward. Chloe knew that facing the past was only the first step. What came next would be the real challenge. Would she be able to forgive? Would she be able to rebuild her family, her life, and her career with this newfound knowledge? As she stepped out into the New York night, Chloe took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything she had learned. She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was hers to walk. And for the first time in a long time, Chloe was ready to take that first step. Determined to start over, the weight of Chloe's past had been a heavy burden on her shoulders, one she had carried with little reprieve. But after the confrontations with her father, the betrayal, and the harsh realities of her family's secrets, Chloe had reached a crossroads in her life. There was no more room for regret, no more time for self-pity. She had spent far too long looking back at everything she had lost, everything that had been taken from her. It was time to move forward, to rebuild her life from the ground up. Chloe stood in front of the large mirror in her apartment, examining herself. The woman staring back at her seemed foreign, yet familiar. She was no longer the naive daughter of a millionaire family, sheltered from the world and its harsh realities. The woman in the mirror was strong, scarred, but resolute. The past had left its marks, but it was no longer her anchor. It was simply the foundation upon which she would build something new. For the first time in years, Chloe felt a spark of hope. She had always been told she had potential, that she was capable of so much more than what life had handed her. And now, she realized it was time to prove that to herself, not for anyone else, but for her own peace and fulfillment. She had always loved fashion. Her mother had been a source of endless inspiration in the fashion world. And even as a child, Chloe had been fascinated by the way clothing could tell a story, create an identity, and transform lives. But in recent years, her love for the industry had dimmed. She had distanced herself from everything related to her family's business, afraid of the shadows it cast on her aspirations. However, after everything she had been through, Chloe realized that her passion for fashion was not just a dream, it was her lifeline. It was what had always kept her grounded, even when everything else seemed to be crumbling around her. Chloe decided to reconnect with her roots, but not in the way her father or anyone else had planned. She was no longer chasing the illusion of wealth and fame. This time, she would create something of her own, something that truly represented who she was. Chloe took a deep breath and started mapping out her plan. She would restart her career from scratch. It wasn't going to be easy, she knew that. The industry was fiercely competitive, and many of the doors that had once been open to her were now closed. But Chloe had a drive that was impossible to ignore. She was determined to show the world and herself that she was capable of standing on her own 2 feet. She reached out to old colleagues she had worked with in the past, offering her services as a consultant and a designer. She reconnected with contacts in the fashion industry who had once admired her work but were wary of getting involved with someone whose name had been tainted by scandal. But Chloe wasn't asking for handouts. She wasn't looking for sympathy or pity. She wanted to prove that her talent was still worth something, that her ideas still mattered. One of the first projects she took on was a small collection for a boutique designer. It wasn't a huge opportunity, but it was a start. She poured all of her creative energy into designing a series of pieces that were fresh, edgy, and true to her artistic vision. For the first time in years, Chloe felt alive again. She spent long hours sketching, sourcing fabrics, and coordinating with suppliers. There were moments of doubt, of course. She wondered if anyone would care about her collection or if it would be lost in the shuffle of an overcrowded market. But every time those thoughts crept in, she pushed them aside. She couldn't afford to be afraid anymore. She had no choice but to move forward. Her first show was a success, far beyond what she had expected. The pieces she had designed were met with genuine praise, and the boutique designer who had taken a chance on her offered her more work. For Chloe, this was proof that she was on the right path. It wasn't just about the money or the recognition, it was about the feeling of fulfillment that came from doing something she loved, something that was authentically hers. But as much as the career side of things was progressing, Chloe knew that there was more to her journey than just work. The emotional scars of the past, the betrayal by her father, the lies, the sense of loss were still there, lingering beneath the surface. But Chloe was ready to confront them. She couldn't move forward in her career, in her personal life, without first making peace with herself. Chloe realized that she had spent so much of her life relying on others for validation. Her father had pushed her to succeed. Her mother had dreamed of her becoming a fashion icon, and even Ethan had tried to shape her path. But now, Chloe had come to understand that true fulfillment would only come when she stopped looking to others for approval. She had to believe in herself, first and foremost. She took long walks through the streets of New York, reflecting on her life, her mistakes, and her victories. She visited the art galleries and museums she once loved, immersing herself in the beauty of the world around her. Chloe began to realize that she was no longer defined by her family's past or the expectations of others. She was her own person, with her own dreams and desires. The weight of her family's legacy no longer had the power to hold her back. She was free to create her own narrative. As the months passed, Chloe's business grew. She expanded her collections, took on bigger projects, and received offers from well-known fashion houses who had once shunned her. The industry was starting to recognize her talent once again, but this time, she was in control. She wasn't working to appease her father's legacy or to live up to anyone else's expectations. She was building something real, something that reflected her own vision. Through it all, Chloe continued to grow emotionally. She spent time working on her relationship with herself, learning how to embrace her flaws and imperfections. She sought therapy, not just to cope with the pain of her past, but to heal the wounds that had shaped her. She learned to forgive herself for the mistakes she had made, the choices she had allowed to define her. The more she focused on herself, the more she realized that the love and acceptance she had sought from others had always been within her grasp. As Chloe sat in her office, reviewing her latest collection and reflecting on her journey, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had come so far from a young woman who had once been consumed by fear and doubt. She was no longer the person defined by her past failures. She was now the person who had risen from the ashes, stronger and more resilient than ever before. Chloe knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But she also knew that she had the strength to face whatever came her way. She had made the decision to take control of her life, to stop letting her past define her, and to build a future she could be proud of. For the first time in years, Chloe felt at peace. She was ready to move forward, ready to embrace the future with open arms. And no matter what came next, she knew she had the courage to face it. The past was behind her, and the future was hers to create. The shift in the relationship with Ethan as Chloe continued to rebuild her life. The weight of her past seemed to lighten with each passing day. She had begun to regain her confidence, finding solace in her work and a newfound sense of self. However, amid this personal transformation, one thing remained constant: her relationship with Ethan Matthews. What had begun as a simple business arrangement, one of convenience and circumstance, had slowly evolved into something deeper, something Chloe couldn't deny. At first, Chloe had been hesitant to open her heart to Ethan. His support had been invaluable, especially during the times when she felt like the world was collapsing around her. But as much as she appreciated his help, she couldn't shake the nagging doubt that lingered in the back of her mind. Why was he helping her? Was it because of the business opportunities he saw in her? Or was it because he truly cared? Her heart wanted to believe the latter, but her past experiences had taught her to guard her emotions carefully. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, something undeniable began to take root between them. It was subtle, at first small gestures that Chloe might have overlooked in the past. A soft touch on her shoulder when she was stressed, a reassuring glance during moments of uncertainty. Ethan had a way of making her feel seen, not just as a business partner, but as a person with her own dreams, fears, and struggles. It was a connection she had never felt before, not with anyone, let alone a man like Ethan. One evening, as they sat together in her apartment, surrounded by sketches and fabric samples for her next collection, Chloe felt the shift more clearly than ever. Ethan had been helping her with a particularly difficult design project, offering insights that were both practical and heartfelt. Chloe had always admired his keen eye for detail, his deep understanding of fashion, but tonight she saw him through a different lens. The man who had once seemed like a distant, almost untouchable figure now felt more real, more present than ever before. "I know things haven't been easy for you," Ethan said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "But I've seen you grow so much. You've come so far, Chloe. I'm proud of you." Chloe looked up, her heart swelling with emotions she hadn't expected. His words, simple as they were, carried so much weight. She had never had someone believe in her so completely, so unconditionally. And in that moment, she realized something profound. Despite the doubts she had about Ethan's motivations, there was no denying the way he made her feel. He was there for her, not just as a mentor or a business partner, but as someone who genuinely cared. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Ethan," Chloe admitted softly, her voice betraying the vulnerability she had kept hidden for so long. "You've helped me more than you'll ever know." Ethan smiled, his eyes warm and sincere. "You've always had it in you, Chloe. I just help you find your way. You're stronger than you realize." As Chloe looked into his eyes, something clicked. She had spent so much of her life questioning her worth, measuring herself against the expectations of others. But with Ethan, she felt seen, not for her past, not for her mistakes, but for who she was in that moment. For the first time in a long time, Chloe allowed herself to feel that connection, that spark of hope that had once felt so distant. But even as their relationship deepened, Chloe couldn't ignore the lingering questions she had about Ethan's past. She knew there were things he wasn't telling her, things that, if revealed, could change everything between them. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was still so much about Ethan that she didn't understand. What had drawn him to her in the first place? Was it just business, or was there something more? The answers came sooner than she expected. One evening, as they were having dinner at a quiet restaurant, Ethan seemed unusually distant. His usual charm and wit were gone, replaced by an air of quiet tension. Chloe couldn't help but notice the way he kept glancing at his phone, as if waiting for something. Her intuition told her something was off, and she decided it was time to confront him. "Ethan, what's going on?" Chloe asked, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "You've been different lately. Is everything okay?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, his fingers tapping nervously against his wine glass. "There's something I need to tell you, Chloe. I didn't want to burden you with it, but I think you have a right to know." Chloe's heart began to race. She had known this moment was coming, had known that at some point the past would catch up with them both. She waited, her breath caught in her throat as Ethan gathered his thoughts. "The truth is," he began, "there's a reason I've been so invested in helping you. It's not just because I see potential in your business, it's because of my connection to your family. My father and your father have a complicated history, one that goes back years." Chloe's mind raced. She had always known there was something more to Ethan's involvement in her life, something that went beyond business. But this was a bombshell. She had always suspected that there was more to Ethan's story, but the reality of it felt like a slap in the face. "My father and your father were once business partners," Ethan continued, his voice low. "But things went south. There were betrayals, lies, and secrets that were buried under the surface. Your father made some choices that caused a lot of people to lose everything. And I've been trying to make things right, try to undo the damage that was done." Chloe felt a wave of shock and disbelief wash over her. The man she had grown to care for, the man who had supported her when no one else would, had been tied to the very family that had caused her so much pain. She didn't know how to process it. Was this all just a business strategy for him? Had he been playing her the entire time? But as she looked at him, she saw the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, not in the way she had imagined. He was simply telling her the truth, the hard truth, about his past and the reasons he had gotten involved with her. And in that moment, Chloe realized something important. She had been afraid of the truth for so long, had buried it under layers of doubt and fear. But the truth, no matter how painful, was always the key to moving forward. "You should have told me sooner," Chloe said quietly, her voice tinged with hurt. "But I understand now. You weren't doing this to hurt me, were you?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I wasn't. I wanted to help you, Chloe. I wanted to show you that you could rebuild, that you didn't have to be defined by your family's mistakes." And In a way, I think helping you is my way of making amends for what my father did to yours. Chloe sat back, her mind reeling. There were so many emotions swirling inside her: anger, confusion, relief. But above all, there was clarity. Ethan had been part of the puzzle all along, a piece she hadn't been able to fit into place until now. He hadn't been just a man who wanted to help her succeed. He had been trying to make peace with a past he couldn't change, just as she had been trying to make peace with hers. "I don't know what the future holds," Chloe said slowly, her voice steady but uncertain. "But I know one thing. We can't keep running from our past. We need to face it together." Ethan smiled, a small, relieved smile. "I couldn't agree more." And in that moment, Chloe realized that no matter how complicated their pasts were, they had a chance to build something together. A future built on truth, trust, and the willingness to move forward no matter the obstacles that lay ahead. The final chapter, as Chloe sat in the quiet of her apartment, the sun casting a soft glow through the windows, she couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey she had been through. Life had thrown its fair share of challenges at her, challenges that had at times left her feeling broken, unsure, and lost. Yet, here she was, standing on the precipice of a new beginning. She had faced the darkest corners of her past, uncovered the painful secrets that had haunted her family, and come out stronger on the other side. And now, with Ethan by her side, she was ready to move forward. The woman who had once felt abandoned by her dreams, overshadowed by her family's financial ruin, was now someone different, someone brimming with hope, determination, and strength. It wasn't just the success of her fashion career that had transformed her. It was the love and understanding she had found in Ethan. They had been through so much together, and in those shared moments of vulnerability and strength, their bond had only grown stronger. Ethan stood beside her as an unwavering pillar of support. At first, Chloe had been wary of his involvement in her life. She had wondered whether his motives were pure or tainted by his own hidden agenda. But as they both worked through their pasts and faced the demons that had once controlled them, Chloe realized that Ethan's love was genuine. He wasn't just there to help her reclaim her career. He was there to help her reclaim her life, her happiness, and her self-worth. The first time Chloe truly believed in herself again was during a fashion show she had worked tirelessly to prepare for. The nerves that had once gripped her with every step she took in the fashion world were replaced by a new kind of confidence. Standing backstage, her eyes on the models strutting down the runway in her designs, she finally understood the extent of her growth. This was the moment she had dreamed about, the moment where she would prove to herself that her past did not define her. Ethan had been there the entire time, offering encouragement and cheering her on from the sidelines. Chloe could feel the weight of his gaze, steady and full of pride. When a final model walked off the runway, Chloe met Ethan's eyes. His smile was enough to erase any lingering doubts she had about the future. It wasn't just about the success of the show, it was about the fact that they had made it through together. They had faced adversity, confronted their pasts, and come out on top, side by side. After the show, as Chloe and Ethan stood outside, taking in the cool night air, the weight of what they had accomplished together seemed to settle between them. For the first time in a long time, Chloe felt truly at peace. She had made it through the storm, and now she was ready to embrace the calm. "I couldn't have done it without you," Chloe said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. Ethan looked at her, his expression soft and sincere. "You're stronger than you think, Chloe. You always have been." In that moment, Chloe realized that her journey wasn't just about success or overcoming challenges. It was about finding love, healing, and forgiveness. She had spent so much of her life questioning her worth, held back by the expectations of others and the weight of her family's past. But through the love and support of those who cared about her, Ethan, her friends, and even the lessons she had learned from the painful experiences, Chloe had finally found her place. She had learned to forgive not just Ethan or her family, but herself. The guilt and self-doubt that had once chained her down had finally been lifted. She understood now that the mistakes of her past did not have to define her future. The mistakes her mother had made, the pressure her father had placed on her, The financial ruin her family had experienced, they were all part of the story. But they didn't have to be the end of the story. Chloe was ready for a new chapter one that wasn't just about business or fashion, but about living a life that was true to herself. With Ethan by her side, she could face anything. She didn't need to keep fighting against the past anymore. It was time to move forward. As the days passed, Chloe and Ethan continued to build their life together, both professionally and personally. They worked on new projects, tackling challenges as a team. Chloe found joy in the small moments, whether it was sharing a quiet evening with Ethan or finding new inspiration for her designs. She felt alive again, her heart full of hope for what the future held. But it wasn't just about the work. The love between Chloe and Ethan had blossomed into something deep, something meaningful. Chloe realized that love wasn't just about passion or excitement. It was about trust, understanding, and mutual respect. Ethan had shown her that love could be a steady, grounding force, something that held her up even in the hardest of times. They had come so far together, and as they looked forward to the future, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a team. Chloe had found the strength. She had found a sense of peace within herself. And in Ethan, she had found a love that was real, a love that had healed the wounds of the past and given her the courage to step into the future with confidence. And as they walked hand in hand, ready to embrace the next phase of their journey, Chloe knew that the best was yet to come. She had survived the storm, and now she was ready to thrive. With Ethan by her side, there was nothing she couldn't face. Together, they had built something beautiful, and the future was brighter than she ever could have imagined. In the end, Chloe realized that life wasn't about avoiding the storms. It was about learning how to dance in the rain. And with Ethan by her side, she was ready to dance. Thank you for watching this heartfelt journey unfold. If you enjoyed Chloe's story, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to Stories TH for more gripping tales. Your support means the world to us. Stay tuned for more stories that will inspire and move you. Don't miss out. Subscribe now and join our community.